Yeah, now I am live. I am reading The Lord and the Lady, The Laird and the Lady. It's a book by Joan Marshall Grant. She wrote books about her farm memories. This one, 7 books in fact, including The Winged Pharaoh, which was very famous, published 1937. This one here was published 1949, and it is her one and only fictional novel, which starts in a romantic French chateau where the lad meets his lady, who is an American heiress who travels incognito to avoid fortune hunters. They fell in love, they got married, and they are on their way to Paris. We're here in part 2 of this book, entitled Crossing the Border. The train, which before the war used to be called the Royal Highlander, plunged into a tunnel and woke Marylda from an uneasy doze. Rowan was lying asleep on the opposite seat, for since crew did have had the carriage to themselves. For since crew they had the carriage to themselves. She wondered if they had reached Scotland yet, and wiped the misted window with her handkerchief. She tried to see what type of country they were travelling through, but it was still too early to find anything except her reflection in the dark glass. In spite of their efforts to leave Paris by 7, it had been nearly 9 before the car had been brought round from the garage. Rowan had become increasingly angry. The hall porter had telephoned repeatedly, only to reaffirm that someone had put the key of the car in the wrong place and nothing could be done until he came on duty. Marylda had tried to persuade Rowan to have breakfast, and at least he had reluctantly accepted a cup of black coffee. He drove out of Paris at a speed which earned the respect and profanity of several taxi drivers. Marylda prayed that she would not make a mistake in map reading, but failed to take the correct fork at St. Denis, and so wasted another 10 minutes. They could still have made the afternoon boat if they had not had to stop twice to clean the plugs and then had a puncture outside Amiens. Rowan changed the wheel. The tire was flat. Someone had stolen the pump. Perhaps we shall be able to get on the auto carrier tomorrow, she said consolingly. I ought to have left the bloody car in Paris. Duncan could have brought it over. We ought to have caught the golden arrow instead of trying this idiotic scheme. It's more of an adventure this way, she said, hoping that she would not produce a further outburst of wrath. But for some unlikely reason he experienced a sudden change of mood. Darling, you're wonderful. Even when I'm intolerable, you must never forget that I adore you. Any other woman would be furious at an idiot husband who hadn't even the sense to check over the toolkit. But you're not even grumbling. Want any help? Inquired the driver of a lorry, who had pulled up at the unusual sight of a couple embracing on the running board of a car with a GP plate. He pumped up the tire, refused a tip, and drove on with the reflection that the English were less phlegmatic than he had been led to believe. They reached Boulogne in time to see the auto carrier leaving the harbour. The AA agent had already left, but they discovered him in a cafe, and he obligingly returned to his office to confirm that there was no booking available for a week. He phoned through to Calais and found there was no vacancy there either, but advised trying to get on the morning boat in case someone failed to keep a reservation. Marylda suggested they might spend the night at Le Touquet, but Rowan refused to risk a further delay. The hotel in Calais was full, and they had to go back to Saint-Omer before they could find a room. At 6 in the morning they were at the docks. The authorities were kind but firm. It was definitely impossible to take another car, but they would see it was sent across when there was a vacancy. Rowan handed the car papers to the AA man and carried the luggage, which Marylda had increased by 7 suitcases and a hat box. Took it to the buvette on the quay, there being another hour to waste before they were allowed on board. It's undoubtedly going to be a rough crossing, said the barman cheerfully as he put 2 cups of coffee on the marble table in front of them. You would perhaps like a cognac? Rowan looked at the drab shelves and his interest quickened. Marylda, unless I'm seeing a mirage, there appears to be champagne. It would be heartening to split a bottle. In a few minutes they began to feel more confident. Are you a good sailor? Inquired Rowan. If not, I will get hold of the purser before the train arrives and insist on a cabin. I'm usually quite reliable, but I don't know if the Channel has any special horrors. One has heard stories. Darling, of course, you've never been to England. How extraordinary. Quite a number of people are born in other parts of the world, she said demurely. They're called foreigners, and swing by their tails from trees. But you're not a foreigner any longer. You must admit there are advantages in being married to a lugubrious Scot. Every advantage. Let's get a cabin anyway, and take another bottle with us to toast France, where we found each other, and my new country. The barman had not been unduly pessimistic about the weather, but Rowan managed to conceal that he was far less confident a sailor than his wife. He sent a radiogram to Georgina. Married, arriving tomorrow, Rowan. It was brief but redundant. Words and telegrams was another of the things likely to annoy her. Perhaps it would have been wiser to break the news by letter. No, he would have been a fool to allow anything to spoil this honeymoon. How would she react to Marylda? Too late to worry about that now. He'd find out soon enough. At Euston, Rowan was mildly annoyed to find there were no sleepers available, but already his normal attitudes towards money had begun to reassert itself, and he decided it was well worth sitting up all night to save nearly £6. Marylda, being unaware of this consideration, was relieved that he was not upset by this further flaw in the plans he had made from the Ritz. He had remained cheerful during dinner in the restaurant car, and even made the surprising remark that it was good to get back to English food. In view of the cardboard soup, Mackintosh fish, and pink blancmange, she thought he was joking, but realized in time that it was a serious comment. Until they had the compartment to themselves, he remained inert behind the Times, while she wondered whether she would ever learn to think Punch funnier than the New Yorker. Was talking to strangers in trains another English taboo? If so, it must be very dull, unless they always travelled in pairs. She smiled to herself. They ought to have train hostesses so that people could be properly introduced. Could he really have meant what he said about the dinner? Would she be able to choose proper meals, or would the cook be very set in her ways? Probably all the servants would be family retainers and resent any change in their routine. She would have to be careful not to offend them. Or would they still only take orders from Georgina? Why was Rowan frightened of his grandmother? Or was it only the tradition of maternal authority? American mothers were often disgracefully possessive, especially of only sons. Perhaps grandmothers were worse with only grandsons. Would Georgina meet them at the station? No, for they were due at 7 and it was 50 miles by road, too far for an old lady so early in the morning. She probably faked heart attacks if she didn't get her own way, which would account for Rowan being afraid of upsetting her. She must be very old-fashioned to be prejudiced against foreigners just because her husband's first wife had been American. She probably wore always black like Queen Victoria, after being a widow for how long was it? Rowan had said his grandfather died in 1902, the year his father was born. She would be small with delicate bones, have white hair, parted in the middle and screwed into a tight little bun. She would walk with an ebony cane and always wear a cameo brooch that was really a locket with a strand of her dead husband's hair inside. She tried to feel kindly. Wouldn't anyone be jealous if a strange young woman tried to take away one's grandson? The train rattled over points and Rowan opened his eyes. What's the matter, darling? He said sleepily. I was hoping I shan't be jealous of my grandson, she said. He laughed. Darling, aren't you missing a generation? Oh, damn. Why is this a corridor train? This was the end of Crossing the Border, and chapter 2 is entitled The Gates of Cloud. Cloud being the castle where she is going to. Have a good day. What are you doing?